in my mind, tends to just allow you to measure yourself against something. Saying it's almost like a checklist. When you go on an airplane, I'm sure the pilot's flown many times before, and they probably think, why do I need this checklist every single time?
Yeah.
But because there's always something that you might miss and something you need to consider as well. Past Lukasz being a pen tester and a red teamer, if he could see me now, would kick my butt sort of thing, because I'm looking at PCI compliance and the intricacies of the detail. And as a pen tester, you say, oh, you're PCI compliant. Cool. I still bypassed everything and got whatever you got. So I think, if you're really big, then probably less technical.
Yeah.
But if you're still pretty close to the coalface and your team is quite small or the organization's quite small, I think being from that technical background tends to help a lot.
If you are looking to speak at an event which is like a BlackHat conference, and you perhaps are a CISO yourself or trying to become a CISO in an organization which is probably has never done security before, or in an organization which is retail, advertising, and perhaps what are some of the challenges if you are a technical CISO, which I started off as a technical CISO, and now we've moved on to knowing about frameworks and governance and why is that even important. In this particular conversation, I had Lukasz, who is a CISO based out of Melbourne, Australia. He is also a speaker coach at BlackHat conference in the USA. He helps a lot of first-time speakers and experienced speakers had their story told really well at BlackHat, but also on his day job when he's not helping out a lot of BlackHat speakers have that best time on the stage. He's also a technical CISO like myself, who's solving challenges in the retail industry. He's come from an advertising space. Before that, he used to be in the offensive security space. Being a pen tester, coming into the world of being a leader. We spoke about what are some of the changes he noticed between security challenges in the retail industry to the advertising industry that he came from before. We also spoke about, is there advantages to be a technical CISO, or does it become harder if you're not from that GRC background when you start becoming a CISO for the first time? We also spoke about our shared love for having more people become CISOs. What's the right way to approach this? What can you expect as a CISO? What are the good frameworks to start with? Talking about frameworks, we also spoke about NIST CSF 2.0 as well, which only came out in 2024 and was a great walkthrough of how he implemented that into his organization and what you could look into if you are starting off as a CISO in a new organization and trying to build that program, what you could be looking at as well. If you're someone who's trying to become a CISO or looking into implementing a cybersecurity program for the first time and it's their first role as a CISO, this is definitely a conversation for them that they should be listening into and watching. If you're someone who's looking to speak at a conference as well and wants to hone that in, this would definitely help you from a public speaking perspective. Overall, I think it'll be a great episode. As always, if you're here for a second or third time, and if you're watching this on YouTube, definitely give us a follow, subscribe, or share this with other people who may enjoy this episode as well. But if you are listening to this on iTunes or Spotify, definitely leave us a review and rating. It definitely helps more people find out about us as well. Hello, welcome to another episode of Cloud Security Podcast. Today, we are at BlackHat USA 2024, and I've got Lukasz. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much for having me.
We've been talking offline for a long time, and we've known each other for a while. Could you share a bit about yourself to the audience who may not know who you are?
I'm Lukasz Gogolkiewicz. I just go by Lukasz because my surname is not too easy to pronounce for most people. So for me, I kicked off my career in the more offensive security space. I initially started off as a bit of a sysadmin network engineer, then moved into the offensive security, so pen testing, red teaming, social engineering. And then I found myself at a bit of a crossroads of, and I remember you and I were talking about this way back when, of like, do I go down the security leadership CISO kind of pathway?
Yeah.
Or do I continue on down this consultancy route and maybe start up my own consultancy? I eventually just, said, okay, let's go down this CISO route.
Yep.
Had a chat to a bunch of CISOs and said, hey, what's it like?
Yeah.
And they gave me their feedback, positive, negative, everything between. They gave me like a full assessment. Thankfully, no one was crying at the time, so that's pretty good. But so from there, I had a chat with one of my ex-bosses now, and he said, hey, if you really want to do this thing, I can help you get into the role. I'm looking for a head of corporate security, but I can train you up to be a CISO at one point.
Yeah.
And then you can get a lay of the land, get a full understanding, and eventually you'll be in a position either you can backfill my role because I've moved on, or you can find your own opportunity, and that's what I've done.
All right. And at the moment, as a CISO, obviously there's different industries that you've worked across. You've had the starting off as an offensive person, moving to an advertising company, tech company, and then now in the retail industry space as well. What are the challenges on the security side in a advertising kind of company, which is tech first?
Yeah, so in a tech-first company or a tech company or any kind of ad company, the challenges are essentially your entire profile is online. So in the cloud, right? So everything is cloud-first or digital native or cloud native or whatever terminology you want to use these days. So everything's centered around the cloud, and your more kind of traditional corporate assets tend to be just tools and pathways or roads and bridges used to get to the cloud eventually. So for me, coming initially from that, what do you want to call it, old school background, where I was a network admin or network engineer and moved into pen testing. I was predominantly pen testing traditional networks in a data center and stuff. Making that transition was super, super interesting just because everything's in the cloud. So
now that moving from a tech advertising company onto the retail side, what's been the difference there in terms of how the challenges are?
Yeah, moving from your entire stack being entirely online and in the cloud, or utilizing a multiple SaaS providers and services, essentially moving through to bricks and mortar. So you talk to any person working in retail, they'll see, we have stores.
Actual stores, which you touch and feel,
you go in, you go pick up something and pay for it at the checkout or point of sale. So that also presents a very unique threat model, because all of a sudden you have to genuinely think about physical security as something that you have to incorporate into your cybersecurity program.
Are there challenges from a consumer side a bit more obvious or highlighted a bit more compared to an advertising company?
I remember one of my first jobs when I was in high school was working for a retailer. In Australia, it's Big W. So it's like a big Walmart type of place. I didn't care about cybersecurity or anything. I just wanted to get my whatever it was an hour and then get my paycheck and go home sort of stuff, right? And hang out with my friends on a weekend. So that was never on the forefront of my mind. And that's what I've taken into that role as well, saying we hire 15, 16, 17-year-old people who are at high school. Cybersecurity is not in the forefront of their mind. They know what they need to do in terms of some regulations that there are in place and stuff, and things like from loss prevention perspective or PCI perspective, there's all sorts of training material they have to pass in terms of assessment. There's that, but other than that, they're not really worried about phishing emails or scams or smishing or vishing or anything else. They're worried about their high school grades or whatever.
And the threat actors, are they dramatically different between advertising industry? So as a CISO, obviously, you're trying to make programs that are based on threats, potential compliance, and other things as well. You've obviously moved into a role and you've now come from an offensive security background. For people who are building a cybersecurity program today, and I think you've gone through the journey recently yourself, are there frameworks that you were tapping into that were helpful to start building that? Obviously, one framework may not be applicable to everything, so I'm sure you have your own take on this as well. What was your approach to building a cybersecurity program? And the reason I ask this is because a lot of the people who are listening to the conversation we have in terms of our practitioners probably want to be CISO one day as well. And a lot of people want to know, what happens in the first 90 days? Or am I just basically, because a lot of people may not even land in a place where there is an established program. So they might have to build one from scratch or have other duties around it. How would you describe the best way to approach a cybersecurity program?
There's a saying I like where frameworks are like armpits. We all have them, or everyone has them. They all stink. You just pick and choose components of each single framework that are applicable to your specific area, right? So if you land on NIST CSF 2.0, which kind of really came in this year. And I was actually quite fortunate because it was really good timing, because when I took my new role, the Verizon data breach report came out and a NIST CSF v2 was shortly before that. So it was perfect timing for me to say, let's just align everything. I'm new here. Let's align everything to these things. And being in a very specific vertical, there's a lot of data, fortunately, especially in the Verizon breach report or any other report like CrowdStrike have them, S1 have them as well, right? You read all those things and there's a very specific vertical around retail. So you can easily start zeroing in and saying, hey, what's applicable to me? And it's primarily things like e-commerce attacks, like with MageCart and threat actor groups sort of thing, where they'll plant themselves in an e-commerce website and try to siphon credit card data, pretty much.
Also, it'd be like almost like a copycat. Okay. Oh, because and for context for people, we spoke about retail being a lot of physical stores, but they have online stores as well. And that's for the e-commerce side that you're referring to.
Yeah, within retail, depending on the business, you might have one e-commerce platform and that's it. And think of something like Kmart.com or Target.com, right? They'll have primarily one e-commerce website, but when you go a level above and you have a group that owns a whole bunch of companies, they might have multiple or dozens, maybe even more. So there's an e-commerce footprint you have to worry about. There's a physical store footprint you have to worry about. And in certain circumstances, you might have some kind of wholesale or B2B type of footprint as well to be concerned about.
Was there something about the NIST CSF 2.0 that stood out? Because compared to the previous version, were there things that stood out for you in the 2.0 that made more sense? Oh, okay, because I guess a lot of people have done the 1.0 version. They may already have a bias from it, and fortunately, you didn't have that bias in the beginning, so you could come with a clean slate. What was it that stood out for you, and was it easy to go down that path of implementing it, or at least using that as a measurement?
Yeah, the first thing that stood out for me, because it was relatively new, there wasn't really a lot of information out there. So unless you went to a specific Big Four or consultancy that does this day in, day out, and for years has probably been training their staff of, hey, NIST CSF 2.0 is coming out, and some of their staff were probably included in that conversation of how to frame it. Going in as doing it in magic time of researching what the new CSF framework looks like, it's really difficult to do that amongst everything else you have to do across the board, right? So for me, the thing that stood out to me was the lack of information, which is great, fantastic. You jump online and there's a few people that did some short presentations. It was primarily, hey, here's what's changing. And by the way, you can get our services if you like.
Okay, fair. Okay, yeah. Rather than the actual value part of how do I implement this?
Yeah, 100%. So there's LinkedIn Learning is actually pretty good space for a lot of these. Hey, I need to implement PCI. I need to implement this or that. Then they're really good resources for saying, okay, how do I not look like an idiot when I'm entering a conversation? Or what do I need to know is that I know the last one, what's the new one? So that was a component which heavily stood out for me. But also they took a lot of what was typically what's that chef that does the salt thing? Governance was kind of scattered all around the categories. They've kind of pulled that out and put that into its own dedicated category around governance.
So it's not just identify,
detect, protect, respond, recover.
No, it sounds like people should just get a tattoo of it as well. Cybersecurity people with a tattoo of NIST CSF. Yes. But so what is different about govern then?
It's just a lot of governance control. So the thing that stood out to me, and it was really difficult to articulate, and also to my stakeholders, but also difficult to measure. There was a few areas in there was is essentially cybersecurity taken seriously in your organization? And that's, as someone new coming into the organization, it's really difficult to rapidly wrap your arms around it saying, oh yeah, it is. Everyone's saying the right things. So a tactic that I employed was I did almost spot quizzes with people. As I met them saying, oh, this is Lucas, he's just joined sort of stuff. I was almost quizzing them at the same time. And it was just banking that in my little scratch pad in the back of my mind and saying, oh, hey, do you know where our cybersecurity policy is? I'm trying to look for it. Or do you know where this is? Or do you know what, hey, if you clicked on a phishing email, do you know what to do?
Yeah.
So those kind of things of, is the education awareness there? Is the governance there around people? Do people know where everything is?
Yeah.
I started to build that little mental model. But I think for someone that's been there a lot longer, probably going from the old NIST CSF to the new one, then I think that's going to be a lot easier to make that transition. Okay. The data's there. You've done, it's a lot of work to do it yourself.
Yeah.
The data's there. You can make that transition quite easy. Because you're more instilled, you can actually answer those questions a little bit easier as well. But then on the flip side, because you're more instilled, you're more likely to just breeze past certain things it's not that bad. Coming with fresh eyes obviously has its perks as well.
Because a lot of people who probably are aspiring CISOs probably would not even understand the value of a framework for why does it matter? Why can't I just look at all the exciting threats that are coming out on the internet and I look out for the fact that I'm mitigating those threats or not? What's the importance of a framework in the context of an organization?
You can do that. You can definitely very much do whatever you want, right? But the framework, in my mind, tends to just allow you to measure yourself against something. Saying it's almost like a checklist. When you go on an airplane, I'm sure the pilot's flown many times before and they're probably thinking, why do I need this checklist every single time?
Yeah.
But because there's always something that you might miss and something you need to consider as well.
Yeah.
Same with the framework. And whether that's NIST CSF or CIS or any of the other ones floating around, there's many, absolutely. For me, NIST CSF was the one I kind of zeroed in on them.
Yeah.
And the reasoning for that was, and actually it was a really good tip provided to me by someone I know quite well. He said that, hey, when you're going to that role and you're trying to choose a framework, have a look at the board of directors, because ultimately you're going to be reporting on your program to the board, and do some OSINT and find out what other boards they sit on, because typically board members will sit on multiple, and reach out to their CISOs and say, hey, what framework do you report on to the board? And you might find that they all report on NIST. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So then you only have to explain it once, or they already know. Whereas if they all report on CIS, but you're going NIST, you might find yourself trying to explain some of the concepts and lose time in that board meeting.
In the context of applying this across the board from a NIST CSF perspective or CIS, not everything would be applicable for sure, and you may have to pick and choose. But from a regional context, like Australian context or New Zealand context, people may look at that, but that's an American framework. We're definitely different. I'm sure many, and that's just not Australia, New Zealand, but I'm sure on a broader landscape. Why the NIST CSF or CIS? Why are there no local Australian frameworks?
No, there's really good ones around like the ACSC and ASD's like Essential 8.
Yeah.
And when you have to pick 8 versus, I can't remember how many there are off the top of my head with NIST, but there's a lot more than 8.
Yep.
You think, oh, yeah, we'll just do 8. That's a lot easier. And it's a great framework and it's been renowned across the world as something really good to aspire to. But for us specifically, it doesn't really tailor for our business. Well, a lot of businesses, it's really good if you want to stop ransomware, stop spread of malware and whatnot. Fantastic, but it doesn't incorporate some of those wider things like security awareness, governance controls, those types of things, which typically make for a more robust kind of framework. I think the best approach, it's a lot of work, but you can definitely adopt a multi-framework approach to your cybersecurity program.
Pick the one that you like the most.
Yep. I can't remember it off the top of my head and I'll have to look it up. But there's a really good in terms of like overlap for NIST CSF and then CIS and Essential 8 and ISO and it goes.
So someone's actually done that mapping already?
Someone's done the mapping and the gaps that each one, because there's gaps between CIS and NIST because the organizing bodies said, that's more relevant for us and not so much for the others. There's a real understanding of what those gaps look like. So you can actually pick and choose. And you can tailor it to your business because you can't just make one framework for all cyber for everyone all around the world because you might operate critical infrastructure, you might be in finance, you might be a university, or you might be retail, or you might be a tech company.
If I were to think about levels in terms of, I'm a CISO, I've worked in an organization, I may not have the best knowledge in NIST CSF, or I may not be the most technical person out there. I don't have an offensive security background to come from pen testing to have an attacker mindset. I come more from a compliance background or whatever the use case may be. I feel like if you were to think about different levels, level 0 could be a Essential 8 to start off with. And then you build up on, okay, now that I've done that, I can build up on, whether should I pick CS or should I pick NIST? I don't know if you have some thoughts on what's a good level to start with if you don't have anything to go with.
Or if you honestly have nothing to go with, the best one is whatever is in arm's reach or whatever is within the expertise of the team. So you might have a vague understanding of CSF or a vague understanding of CIS. That's the good one to pick and choose. For me personally, I found a lack of open source resources available for the CSF framework, especially 2.0 to measure it. There's a lot more info out there, and the Center of Information Security, CIS, do release like a tool you can use, and it's fantastic. And you can use that to measure yourself against the framework, and it gives you pretty graphs and all that thing you can use for your reports and say, here's where we're tracking. So to answer your question more specifically, it's just genuinely the one that you have available to you. If your organization can't spell security, then obviously you're starting from a very low maturity. So that's the assessment you do, saying, what do we need to focus on first? Read something like those DBIR reports and then understand your threat landscape and say, for me, I come from a very specific mindset of a pen tester and a red teamer. So I come from like a threat-driven approach to cybersecurity, saying who's likely to target us, how are they likely to target us, and how are controls commensurate with what they're likely to target us with. So if you have a threat actor that primarily focuses on e-commerce, then obviously you want to tune your security controls towards things more around web application security. So do you have dependency management? Do you have pen testing? Do you have EDR on the underlying platforms themselves? Or has that been all outsourced? Do you have a WAF? You can roll off so many acronyms from now on, right? But
me personally, as a technical CISO, I see you as a technical CISO as well. Is there an ease, or probably in the way we are moving with technology these days, whether you want to throw AI at it or anything else at it, do you feel that divide that we have in the community for, hey, technical CISO is better than a non-technical CISO and all of that? Do you find that you had an advantage being a technical CISO coming into a role either in your advertising industry or the retail industry? Like being a technical person, does that help or is it a disadvantage?
I think it really depends on the industry, right? So there are certain industries, like you think of someone like the CISO of a massive company. I'm sure they're not really digging these days into code or reverse engineering or anything like that. They may have come from that background. But I think when you're operating in such a huge company and a huge kind of area, you tend to be more leaning towards more like a business-driven type of CISO, right? Where you understand the business, you understand the landscape, You understand things like compliance requirements, regulatory compliance, and legal kind of frameworks you have to adhere to. And then you tailor, you probably have CISOs that report to you. Might be like a global group CISO.
Group CISO, yeah.
And then you might have CISOs that report through to you. It might be a little bit more technically minded or technically aligned. So I think, if you're really big, then probably less technical.
Yeah.
But if you're still pretty close to the coalface and your team is quite small or the organization is quite small, I think being from that technical background tends to help a lot, because it can be that little blow off valve for your team sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Where they're starting to burn out because they're on a lot of things or there's a lot of incidents. You can take that burden off them for a little while.
Yeah.
And then once they get an opportunity to rest, you can say, okay, cool, tag, you're back I'm going to go back to my spreadsheets.
Yeah. Being a technical CISO and the scale of the organization, definitely relatable. But the other thing I found is it depends on the companies. For example, probably a startup, they will care about technology, but they would not care about the fact that I need to be SOC compliant or ISO compliant or whatever. For them, it doesn't make a difference at that point in time, because I just want to survive as an organization. They get to a point where, I need to have compliance because I'm doing B2B sales, whether it's a virtual CISO or CISO, head of security, whatever the role may be. I find that at least at that stage, it's great to have a non-technical CISO, but a technical CISO would still do a good job. In my personal experience, I found that even those organizations are starting to expect people to be technical. And I think I personally lean more on the technical side just because the bias that I've come from. Do you find that people who are watching or listening to this, if they're from a technical background, is there a short where, because they've never done GRC and it's a very specialized skill set, so that's why I use that example specifically, that there's a reason why they exist and they're doing an awesome job? Is that easy to pick up on that part?
Past Lukasz being a pentester and a red teamer, if he could see me now, would kick my butt sort of thing, because I'm looking at PCI compliance and intricacies of the detail and ISO 27001 and NIST and CI, all these kind of frameworks and compliance requirements and whatnot. And naturally, as a pentester, you don't lean into those things, because as a pen tester, you say, you're PCI compliant. Cool. I still bypassed everything and got, whatever you got.
I owned you.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So you tend not to put a lot of onus on those kind of frameworks, but I think they generally do provide a really good sense of guidance and a really good North Star to go to, and also provide that ability to use that as a bit of a stick with some of your stakeholders, saying we have to do these things.
Yeah.
So for me, coming into the role, I was fortunate that I picked up things as I went along over the past few years. And that's what was one of the things that was building me up to eventually get into the role that I have now, or any kind of head of security or CISO or CSO type of role, is you build up those types of, I would almost call it like a catalog in the back of your mind of just things that you know and things that you can lean on. Compliance is definitely one of those things, but so is like legal kind of matters. So in Australia, we're on the cusp of maybe changing our privacy laws, because after the last few issues that we've had for the past 12, 18 months, that's been a bit of a catalyst for some change, for things to update. Now, if you agree with it or not, that's your opinion. I think it's potentially a little bit overdue in terms of updating. I think the Privacy Act, don't quote me, I think it was like last updated in 98. There's probably been amendments and all that kind of stuff like that, but I think it was created in 98. So it's probably due for a little bit of a refresh or polish.
Yeah, of course.
And then we see over in the US as well, a lot of changes coming through from the SEC and some of the legislation changing around that, around liability for CISOs and all sorts of things, which is scary, but you can definitely appreciate where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And chatting to a few CISOs at BlackHat, not a lot of them agree with it, and I think rightly, because a lot of the time you're not really involved
in the decision,
in that decision-making process.
And probably not even allowed to make the decision as well sometimes.
Yeah, so if you go up to your board or your executive team and say, I need X because I need to solve this problem, and they say we don't have budget because this person over there, we're going to be doing a push to this region, we need that capital to do that push for marketing or whatever else.
Yeah.
Fair enough, it's the business decision.
That's right.
But ultimately the business, I think, should be accountable for a lot of those decisions as well. Yeah. It's a collective accountability, right? Yeah,
that's right. And I think that's where the clarification or maybe the education and awareness needs to be built up as well. As much as, yes, it is right, but it goes back to the framework question. I think for me personally, the importance of a framework was that allowed me to have an actual metric for this is where the industry should be, or at least considers as a good standard or an okay standard. Let's just not even go for the best standard. okay standard. And this is where we are. As long as you have the awareness that you're making a decision based on the fact that, oh, I can't put the money on this, whatever this X problem is for a solution. It's based on the fact that this is where we stand and you agree to it. I think I'm cool.
Yeah. And on that, I think, and this is something we don't have, and I think we do need, not to be fully transparent with the maturity of each organization, because that's probably going to cause a lot of legal issues. But what tends to happen at conferences like BlackHat or any other ones like RSA around the world is you do tend to be in a little bit of a room with a lot of CISOs.
Yeah.
And I always zero in on, hey, who's in my specific sector?
Yeah.
And I ask them very pointed questions saying, oh, not fully into the detail of if they're uncomfortable with it. But after a period of knowing them and building that trust, you do tend to ask them the questions like, hey, where would you stand on this CSF for this type of control and why and what are the issues you're seeing around it? So then you can build up that picture of, hey, here's where I am and here's where I am according to my peers. And then you can use that as a bit of collateral to report back to your senior level stakeholders to say, hey, you know what? We're not doing too bad. I'll talk to this person and that person. We're fine. Or, wow, we are really behind.
Yeah.
These are the type of attacks that they're seeing consistently.
Yeah.
It might just be a matter of time before we see those things. When they raise their, shields up to, or crank up security to 11 or whatever, we might see they're too much of a hard target, so they might come after us instead.
That was most of the technical questions I had. I've got 3 fun questions for you as well, man.
Oh, here we go.
First one being, what is something that you're proud of that is not on your social media?
To be honest, I like switching off. And I really enjoy things like woodworking. We've talked about that a lot. And so I'm quite proud that I spent like almost 10 years of my life being a pentester, breaking things.
Yeah.
And I quite like building things. So woodworking and just building just random stuff around the house that my wife says, I need a new shelf or we need this. I'm like, I can do it.
I got this, honey. I got this.
I got this.
What do you spend most time on when you're not busy doing this CISO work? How was your downtime like?
Yeah, downtime, definitely spending time with my wife and my little puppy, or my old puppy. They're always a puppy. Yeah. And definitely spending a lot of time in the workshop, just building things that's just random. So
check out my YouTube channel. Subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
What's the channel called again?
Richmond Woodworks.
Richmond Woodworks. I'll plug that in there as well. Final question. What is your favorite cuisine or restaurant?
There's foods that you have that you're like, if that's in front of me, I will eat all of it. Yes. And there's 2.
Oh,
there's
okay.
2.
Okay.
And my old team always paid me out about this because in my old company, we had an ice cream fridge.
Okay.
So if there's ice cream, I'm there. It's so bad. And the second, every Friday night, if there's no major incident, which tends to be on a Friday night, every Friday night, my wife and I sit down, watch a movie, and we call it pizza and beer night sort of thing.
All right.
So
Okay.
Pizza.
Yo.
I will finish that pizza. If it's a small pizza, I will finish it. If it's one of those
ginormous family size.
Yeah, those New York style, like ginormous things, I will finish that too.
Oh, wow. You hold no prisoners for that.
I know. And then my wife turns around and says, do you regret it? I'm like, I really do.
But at the same time, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I do want to call out because you've been doing mentoring and you don't talk about the career stuff at BlackHat as well. Do you want to share about that as well?
Yeah. So here at BlackHat, I was fortunate enough to be asked to be on a panel around careers.
Yeah.
So I've been around for almost 20 years in this field and it's fantastic. I still love it. I'm still highly passionate about it. And that entire journey kicked off because there's been a handful of people along that journey that said, hey, why don't you try this? Or why don't you come over here? Or I've asked for help and they gave it to me. So I feel it's like naturally my duty of sorts to help the next generation or help others to get into this industry, whether they're coming from outside IT, outside cyber, from nursing or whatever else, and they want to get into the industry. So I was fortunate enough to be asked to be on a panel to talk about that.
Yeah.
And specifically what my journey was like to be the peak person within an organization responsible for cybersecurity.
Yeah. And you're doing helping the speakers as well?
Yeah. So again, someone put me under their wing and gave me some tips and stuff like that for public speaking and whatnot. And I also do the BlackHat Coach Training Program.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
yeah.
So it's open to anyone. So when you submit for BlackHat CFP, you're asked if you want to have a speaker coach. And some people opt in. Some people see it as like, oh no, I feel that as embarrassing. that's fine. You do you. We've had some seasoned speakers, and I'm not going to say who because
Of course,
they're business. We've had some seasoned speakers that will literally just come up and say, hey, can you help me polish this thing? Or just literally, I need a sounding board for a couple of sessions, all the way through to this is my first time presenting. I can't believe I got selected at a wonderful conference like BlackHat.
Yeah.
And I am nervous. I am super nervous. Can you help me? You have everything between, which is fantastic as well.
Yeah.
So I do like to do that.
So with that note, I guess for people who are obviously in this space, are there any top 3 tips that you have for people who want to be, you can totally help them get into become a BlackHat speaker if you can. If they do find themselves to be lucky to get selected for something like a BlackHat or maybe even like a general conference that they're really super excited about, any 3 tips that you have for them to prepare themselves to speak at a conference, their first public speaking event, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few conferences around the world, and a lot of them are starting to do this a lot more, which is fantastic to see.
I think B-Sides Melbourne does it as well.
Yeah. So I'm also affiliated with B-Sides Melbourne, and we have a coaching program.
Yeah, I was going to shout out to the team as well there, yes.
Oh, yeah,
yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
So we have a speaker coaching program for B-Sides Melbourne as well, as well as, hey, do you need some help with your CFP submission? And shout out to Lydia Giuliano, who really...
Lydia's awesome. Yes.
Really is the driving force behind a lot of these community-based initiatives.
She's part of the BlackHat
review board.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
As well as she does a lot of the work behind the scenes around some of the community things as well, associated with BlackHat, associated with AWSN, which is the Australian Women in Security Network, with B-Sides Melbourne, and any other B-Sides that pops up. Anyone says, oh, we want to do some more for the community, everyone always says, talk to Lydia.
That's right. She's the one. Yeah.
But the top 3 things, and this is coming from Lydia, so I'm paraphrasing here, but in my experience as well, really understand what you want to present on. And by that, have a compelling story. I think BlackHat, I can't remember the statistic, I think they had something like 1,700, 1,800 submissions this year. And that means that someone or a bunch of people need to sit down, review that submission. So they take time and they're all volunteers, they take time of their day to review your submission.
Yeah.
So if you don't put in the time, they probably won't either. I'm not saying they won't, but I feel it's unfair on their time to not put in the time as well. You should sit down, actually put in the time. Don't leave it to last minute. Take a week off. Think about the content you want to come across, and then have a re-review of your submission. Reach out to someone that's presented a BlackHat in the past. Ask them to maybe say, hey, can I buy your coffee, or can I buy you a virtual coffee?
Yeah.
And you mind doing a Zoom or something like that, where we can talk through my submission, or so many kind of other people on the internet as well that you can actually reach out to. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to help. And here comes 1,000 submissions.
And I'm like, Lukasz, help us get into BlackHat.
But yeah, so we also do run as part of B-Sides, and as also part of BlackHat, and then also part of some of the other conferences as well. We do run sessions where we say, hey, you want to present at a security conference? Here's the things you need to know. So here's your submission. And when you do get accepted, there's things that you also need to consider, like the structure, the story. I always say to the speakers that I'm coaching, you should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like any other storybook. Take that person on the journey. And if it's something super technical, which is fantastic, we've all been there as technical people, where you're like, I found this vulnerability. There's something here. And you start scratching the surface, you scratch more and you scratch more. Before you know, you're digging a massive hole sort of thing. Take people on that journey, and you can put this in your submission as well, saying, I found this little thing, and then this is what I came up with, and take them on that story as well.
Yeah.
Because there's no doubt people in the audience, or people that are reading your submission as well, that have also found that little thing and said, I've been in that exact same situation. And the final thing I would say is title, because the title is what you read. If you have a look at the BlackHat app, you read the title, immediately it's not available like what the description of or abstract of the talk is. So you got to hook them at the title.
Oh, yeah, actually that's true, because if the title is not enticing enough, you would not even read the description.
Yeah, and it should be as descriptive as possible without being a mile long as well.
And not a clickbait as well.
And not clickbait.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, lose weight now, ask me how kind of thing, right?
If you don't click on this right now, you'll be hacked.
Yeah, exactly. So probably not that. I think that's going to be really difficult. But there could be something like, have you ever wondered what satellite security looks? Come and join me, or have a look at this session, or something as like a bit of a next step.
Yeah.
And it could be anything else, right? Have NIST CSF 2.0 framework, what you need to know.
That's a very good one. And I'm glad you shared this as well, because a lot of people even sometimes struggle to even come up with a topic sometimes. And sometimes it's just as simple as what they might think is not important, and people probably think that the world knows about it. I would just say scratch that surface a bit more, and you might find that sometimes you're the only one who has the answer to that particular thing in the world, who has done something research on it.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone's going through the security journey. It's not like it's a linear thing, right?
Yeah.
For everyone in the world, we're all on that same linear path. Exploit development was really popular way back when. Now we're over it. There's still exploit development.
100%.
People are learning exploit development,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So at every level, at every conference, not just BlackHat. BlackHat is in our industry like the place you want to present at, which is fantastic. There's also other places as well, like you got your DEF CONs, you got your B-sides, Sec Talks, all those others as well, and local meetups. And don't make the assumption that every single individual in the audience already knows everything there is to know about security, because chances are 20, 30% of that audience is going to be made up of people that it's their first time.
Yeah.
It's their first year in cybersecurity.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that's where finding a balance between you want to remain technical so you don't lose a really advanced audience, but at the same time, not too basic that you feel like, what the hell is going on here? I think I came to a very intermediate beginner talk, which is a hard balance to find, I imagine, for a technical talk as well these days.
Yeah, and that's precisely why I go to conferences like BlackHat, is to keep up to date.
Yeah.
I can't possibly spend every single waking moment reading what the latest white papers and researchers are, reading every single article. And I come to conferences like BlackHat, like B-Sides, like DEF CON to keep up to date. And I can also, depending on the organization I'm working for or the industry or the vertical, I can tailor the conference talk I go to accordingly.
Awesome. And thank you so much for sharing that. With that said, I need to put your LinkedIn somewhere so we can flood thousands of questions for, hey, Lukasz, help us get into BlackHat. But thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate this.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is an overall a great conversation. I'm glad that we could do this.
Thank you for listening or watching this episode of Cloud Security Podcast. We have been running for the past 5 years, so I'm sure we haven't covered everything cloud security yet. And if there's a particular cloud security topic that we can cover for you in an interview format on Cloud Security Podcast, or make a training video on tutorials on Cloud Security Bootcamp, definitely reach out to us on info@cloudsecuritypodcast.tv. By the way, if you're interested in AI and cybersecurity, as many cybersecurity leaders are, you might be interested in our sister podcast called AI Cybersecurity Podcast, which I run with former CSO of Robinhood, Caleb Seamer, where we talk about everything AI and cybersecurity. How can organizations deal with cybersecurity on AI systems, AI platforms, whatever AI has to bring next as the evolution of ChatGPT and everything else continues. If you have any other suggestions, definitely drop them on info@cloudsecuritypodcast.tv. I'll drop that in the description and the show notes as well, so you can reach out to us easily. Otherwise, I will see you in the next episode. Peace.